You're listening to the Daily Mishnah Podcast with Benedict.
So the third chapter of the Masechet deals with how we bring the first fruits. So we've jumped away from the analysis, and now we're back into the process. And presently, we'll go back into the recital of the vidui, the confession of the Bikkurim, but we're going to start right at the beginning. Keitzad mafrishin habikurin. How do you set aside the first fruits? Yored adam b'toch sadehu. This person goes down into his field. Veroet ena shebikra, a fig that's ripened. Eshkol shebiker, a cluster of grapes that ripen. Rimon shebiker kosh. And in other words, these are all fruits that are ready to go. Koshro begemi. He ties a rope around it. Ve'omer hare elu bikurim. So he designates it with a marker and with a word, with a statement. And at that point it's designated Bikkurim. It's very interesting. So we can designate as Bikkurim even before we carry out the harvest. It's a pure designation. And Rabbi Shimon was actually going to come by and object. He says, "Afal pi ken chozer v'korei otam bikurim me'achar sheyitlashu min hakarka." He says, "Look, okay, you got to redesignate them as bikurim." I don't think the halacha goes according to Rabbi Shimon, but so that's a designation. And then we can pick them later. And the Mishnah asks, "Okay, keitzad ma'alim et bikurim? How do we bring them up?" And here the story really begins. Kol ha'ariyot of Ma'amad, all the cities of the Ma'amad would assemble. They'd all assemble in the city of the Ma'amad. Velanin birchovot shel ir, and they'd sleep in the street of the town. Velo hi'anu nichnasim labatim. They wouldn't go into the houses because they're anxious about picking up. They're anxious about tuma and tahara. What if somebody should die in that house? God forbid. But, probably more frequent in those days than in these days. You've got these people packed into houses, sleeping inside. If somebody should die in one of those houses, everybody in the house acquires Tuman and they can't go up to Jerusalem. So they're all going to sleep outside. And then early in the morning, Vela Mashkim, the officer, Ha-Muneh, the person that's kind of in charge of the Ma'amad, says, Omer, and how he's going to quote a verse from Jeremiah, Kumu v'na'ale Tzion el Beit Hashem Eloheinu. And this is an extraordinary prophecy from Jeremiah. And I brought you the prophecy on the spreadsheet. It's a prophecy of renewal from Jeremiah. People are going to plant again, they're going to harvest, and then they're going to go up to Jerusalem. It's just as if it's written for Bikkurim. And the question arises, well, what is this Ma'amad? What are the cities of the Ma'amad that assemble in the city of the Ma'amad? And in order to understand the Ma'amad, we need to jump forward to the Mishnah in Tanit. It's actually in the 4th chapter of Tanit. And the Mishnah it quotes a pasuk from Bamidbar, from the Parsha of Pinchas. And it says, it begins to say, the Elu HaMa'amadot. These are the Ma'amadot. So in other words, I'm going to explain to you what the Ma'amadot are. Elu shenemar. Now we're going to quote the verse from Pinchas. Tzavet b'nei Yisrael, command the people of Israel, Korbani lachmi le'ishai, at Korbani lachmi le'ishai, the offering of food, which is presented to me by fire. Reach nichochi, a sweet savor to me. Tishmeru b'moado. You shall tishmeru li b'moado. You shall guard the sacrifice in its season. And the Mishnah asks, well, how can a person's offering be, if you like, guarded or how can you bring an offering when it says you have to guard the offering? How can it be that offered when he's not standing there next to it? And the Mishnah explains that the early prophets ordained 24 watches, mishmar, 24 watches of Kohanim. So these 24 watches would take turns to go up to Jerusalem to perform the temple service. And for each and every mishmar, there was also a ma'amad. And the ma'amad were people of, was everybody. The ma'amar was everybody who would assemble in Jerusalem. It would be composed of Kohanim and Levi'im and Yisraelim. And the ma'amad of Jerusalem would go with the Kohanim to perform the sacrifice, would go with the Kohanim which were performing the sacrifices. So when the time arrived for a mishmar, for a priestly watch to ascend, the Levi'im and the Kohanim would go to Jerusalem. I guess some of the Yisraelim would go too, but the others would gather in their towns and they'd read from Maseh Bereshit. They'd read from the creation. So these are this is the ma'amad. It's the group of people who gather together to read, to study Maseh Bereshit during the time when their Kohanim are going up to Jerusalem to perform the temple sacrifice. And then this Mishnah is saying, look, this ma'amad, the cities of the ma'amad get together to bring the Bikkurim. So someone doesn't bring Bikkurim by himself. They bring it in an enormous group assembled by the ma'amad. So they assemble in the main city, the ma'amad, and then they go up. And they go up in a procession. That's the third Mishnah in the chapter. So Hakrovim Mevi'im Te'enim, those who live near would bring fresh figs and grapes. V'harachokot Mevi'im Groganot Vitzimukim, they bring dried figs and raisins. We know we've learned a lot about dried figs and cakes of dried figs. V'hashur holech lifneihem, and there's an ox going in front of them. And it's very interesting. V'karnav mutzupot zahav, his horns bedecked with gold, with an olive crown on his head. This feels much more like a Roman or a Greek sacrifice than a Jewish sacrifice. It feels a bit Hellenistic, this. The ox is actually going to be an offering as well. So the ox is going to go up and it's going to be decorated like this. This is the only example of a decorated animal we ever see in the temple. V'hachalil makeh lifneihem, and the flutes in front of them, ad shemagiim karov liYerushalayim, and the flutes playing in front of them until they get close to Jerusalem. So they're going up in this enormous procession with everybody from the towns around, with the ox in front of them. And then higiu karov liYerushalayim, they drew close to Jerusalem. They send messages in advance so people know they're coming. Ve'itru et bikurehem. At this point, they start decorating the Bikkurim. So they don't decorate the Bikkurim when they set off from their houses, but they decorate them once they get close. And we're going to learn later in the Mishnah exactly how we'll find in the next few Mishnah exactly how they decorate them. And everyone comes out to meet them. Hapachot v'haskanim v'hagizbarim yotzim likrotam. All the honored people of Jerusalem come out to meet them. Well, when I say all the honored people, lefi chavod hanichnasim hayu yotzim. So according to the status of people who arrive, they go out. It's very interesting. It's socially, this is not purely, if you like, democratic. It depends on who is coming. The people that go out to greet them depend on the status of the people that are coming in. And then all the artisans stand up. All the artisans, Shebi Yerushalayim, all the artisans of Jerusalem stand up in front of them as they come in. V'shoalim bishlomam, and they sort of greet them. They ask for their peace. They greet them. Acheinu anshei makom ploni, people of such and such a place. Batem l'shalom, you have come in peace. So that's the process of bringing the Bikkurim. It's with a procession. It's with music. It's with an animal that's decorated with gold. It's in a crowd. It's, there are 24 of these ma'amadot, right? So this is basically 1/24th of the people of Israel all coming together. And it's it must have been a fantastic sight. It must have been an awesome sight. But anyway, that's the picture of the bringing of the Bikkurim, which the Mishnah begins to present. And then tomorrow we will learn a little bit more about exactly what they did and how they decorated the baskets and what they did when they got into the temple.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the Daily Mishnah Podcast with Benedict.